Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm so glad you're here. I have Jacqueline Wagner on the podcast. So thanks, Jacqueline, for coming on, for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. And so happy that you're here.
Thanks so much, Erin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So do you want to dive in just a little bit about how did you become or get into employment law, and then kind of your story just a little bit for the listeners and viewers?
Oh gosh, how I got into employment law is kind of a funny story. So, I grew up in a union home. My dad was a Teamster, and I grew up with that mentality of a person who's not in management, not the employer, not the business owner, the person who is getting the job done, the boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And that was my orientation. When I went to law school, I really didn't know what kind of law I wanted to practice, but with the tech boom happening in the mid 1990s, I thought, okay, if I go into tech, I'll have some job security. So I took classes on copyright and patent law and anything I could think of that might eventually relate to technology. And that was a really smart move. The only problem with it is that I hated it and it was boring. And so I was prepared to hunker down and just do my job, my boring little job. I was totally prepared for that. And then I was interning, and the woman who was overseeing my work it was in house with an organization. And the woman who was my mentor overseeing my work, the attorney overseeing my work, told me, "Hey, we don't have enough work in copyright patent right now, so I'm going to need you to jump in on some employment law cases." And I was really nervous about that because coming from a union home, I thought, "Oh gosh, I'm going to get flack for this." And I was in
Full
my
circle.
early 20s, so my dad's opinion of me really mattered then. So, I said, "Okay," I was taught a really good work ethic that you do the job that needs to be done, and I did. I got right into it and did the work, and I loved it. I really loved it. And she told me, she said, after I'd done a few things for her, she said, "You seem to really have an aptitude for this. You really relate to the employee's perspective, and we can leverage that in defending the employer because we know where the employee is coming from, and that'll really help you with being a good internal voice for management." I thought, "Oh, I could never do that. I could never do that." She said, and I explained to her why, and she thought that was pretty cute because I was so young. And um, she said, "Why don't you do this? Why don't you call your dad, and why don't you get his blessing and see if it works out? I have a feeling he'll say yes." I was like, "There's no way. There's no way." And I called him up, and he was a furniture and delivery man my whole life for 35 years. And I called him up and I said, "I have this opportunity. The attorney who handles employment law says I have an aptitude for it. I really like it. It's interesting to me." And he asked some probing questions. "So let me get this straight. You're going to be working for the employer. You're going to be doing their bidding." "Yes, that's what I'm going to be doing. And I really like it. I've done a little bit so far and I really enjoy it." And he started to say, and I thought this was going to be the crushing blow where he told me, "No way." He said, "I didn't lift refrigerators over the tops of countertops for 35 years so that you could, and I'm waiting for his next line. And he said, "So that you could do a job you hate. I did a job I hated so that you could choose what you want to do and you get to make your own career trajectory. And I totally support you. And I totally applaud you for finding something that you love. And everybody's goal is to find something you love." And, Thanksgiving dinners were a little tense at first, but everybody got over it. And I was able to advocate for why what I was doing was really good work and important work, and illustrate how I could, from the inside, give the employees perspective. And I was really good at that. And they appreciated that. And from then on, I've been practicing now for 25 years. Um, and I love it. I love every day. It is fascinating, fun work. And I wouldn't trade it for copyright ever again.
I'm like, Dad, you bring tears to my eyes. Like, that's the sweetest thing ever. Because for some of us, right, we have done work we don't love for
Right.
money, and
That's
it
right.
feels absolutely terrible in the body. And I think you have such a unique perspective. It's like we don't know it at the time, right? But all those years that you got to hear the employee side, because I think a lot of times we think of law or, and it's this very, the word that comes to mind is like it sounds combative, or it could be combative,
Yes,
versus how can we make this a win-win for both of us?
that's right.
And how can we support each other and we get what we both want out of this, versus somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose, like a zero sum game, very lack mentality,
Yes,
versus, yeah, love based, and like, how can I support my employees, and how can I also, you know support myself as the business owner.
that's right. I have the unique opportunity to, with that, all that information I have about the employee side, and I was an employee for a long time too. Um, Being able to pop the hood of the employer and look inside and say, "Hey, I think we could do this better. I think you could do that better." And in a way that, as you said, comes from a place of abundance, not lack. Comes from a place of, if I foster my employees to maximize their full potential, I'm going to get their full potential. I'm going to receive their best work. And so it's an investment in the workforce that's going to pay back in spades, I guess it's
Yeah,
called.
dividends. Dividends
It's
is the word that comes to
yeah,
mind.
dividends. Thank you.
Dividends.
It's going
Yeah.
to be an amazing payback because it's an investment that you're making in your
Yeah.
workforce.
So for entrepreneurs that are starting out, or they're kind of moving to like, okay, I'm starting to hire people. And to everyone that's listening and watching, that I am all about empowerment. So like, go do your own research. Like, Jacqueline's not giving you advice here. We're not telling you what you should be doing. We're just opening. I always say, like, we're getting you to like see behind Jacqueline's laptop of what she sees, what she experiences, so that because one of the questions that clients typically say is like, I don't know what I don't know. Like, I don't even know the questions to ask because I don't even know, the knowledge isn't there. So what do you see, or what would you, when I say suggest, I don't mean advise, but just like, what has been your, when you're going from okay, you're a single person shop to, okay, I'm starting to either contract out or I'm having employees, kind of what is that?
Right. Right. Okay. So I want to I want to tee up the ball with another little story.
Okay.
So there is a famous adage that I'm going to kind of relate in common parlance. So picture you're out camping with your family in some random forest, some, woods, forest, whatever your particular demographic is, your particular
What you
geography
love. Yeah.
is. And you come across a stream and you notice that there are babies floating down the stream. Of course, you're going to run down to the stream and start pulling out babies out of this stream to make sure none of these babies drown, right? And let's say you're doing that for an hour. You're pulling babies out of the stream. You're saving a lot of babies, most of the babies, you're saving them, and you're feeling good about that. But then at some point in that time frame, You have to look upstream and go, where are these babies coming from? How do I prevent the babies from coming down the stream in the first place? So that's sort of what I've done in my career. For 25 years, I litigated pulling babies out of the stream as they were rushing down the stream, pulling babies out of the stream, you know, litigating, resolving lawsuits, litigating lawsuits.
It's exhausting.
It is. It's exhausting. But it doesn't solve the problem of
Yep.
where are the babies coming from?
Yep.
How do we prevent the babies from coming down the stream in the first place? And with 25 years experience of getting to pop the hood of so many different employers, I have a pretty good idea of how to prevent the babies from falling down the stream in the first place. And I sort of milk it down to a top 5 of how an employer, a new employer, can leverage preventing litigation, employment litigation, stubbed toes, babies coming down the stream in the first place. In the first place, I like to start is by cultivating the emotional intelligence of the leadership of the organization. And that has to come from the top down. In the 1990s, an industrial psychologist named Daniel Goleman coined a phrase that was already used in psychology, but he coined it to apply to the workplace, called emotional intelligence. And he wrote a book, and now he's written 10, 11, 12 books, and he's a renowned author now. But at the time, he was positing that more important to success than their substantive knowledge in their chosen profession is what's known as emotional intelligence, self-awareness, empathy, self-regulation, motivation, and social deftness or social skills. Those 5 components, when well fostered, will allow someone to maximize sort of those soft skills that make a great leader. And they're going to get really far in their career very quickly. And we see it with, young politicians, young entrepreneurs, young folk who kind of feel like an old soul. It's because they're fostering the emotional intelligence. And that has to come from the top of the organization. Human resources can campaign to have leadership foster their emotional intelligence. But if it's not coming from the top, if there's not buy-in from the top of the organization, it's not going to be a successful campaign. So I always recommend that if an organization is going to start somewhere with changing the culture and climate of the organization to have less litigation and more psychological safety among employees, that's where to start with cultivating the emotional intelligence of the leadership
Themselves. It's like parenting. I mean, it's
right.
in the sense of like we want our children to behave a certain way, but they're modeling us. And
That's
so
right.
in, employer employee relationship, like the energy doesn't lie. It doesn't matter what you're saying. It's how you are energetically interacting with your people and how you are with yourself and how are you responding to your customers and your clients and like that's all that emotionally what you're referring to is that emotional intelligence. Like, are they aware? Are they a do as I say, not as I do? Or are
Right.
they like, no, like I walk my walk and I,
Right.
yeah.
And there is a way, if you set goals and expectations in an emotionally intelligent way, you'll be like the Pied Piper. Your team is going to want to follow you into success. And so that investment into fostering the emotional intelligence of leadership will pay off in dividends. And then the second thing I recommend is employee handbooks that are well communicated and defined. An employee handbook is not just an articulation in black and white in writing of performance expectations or what's legally required. It's also the employer's first opportunity to communicate with new employees about the culture and climate of the organization. What do we stand for? What do we expect of our leadership? How will you be treated at this organization? What is the trade off? And we want to emphasize that here you will feel valued, seen, and heard. That is so important that communicating that to the workforce right out of the gate is so important. But that opportunity is wasted so often when an employee handbook only sets forth, what's legally required and leave time or wage an hour, and it sets performance expectations. You're an at-will employee. We're going to fire you if we want. You don't have any rights. That's important to say out loud, but what's more important is to set your climate and culture. This is what we're about. You're going to feel valued, seen, and heard. Here's where you complain if you have a gripe. Here's an employee resource group that you can go to if you belong to a protected class. Here's this resource, here's that resource. You can set up the ball to begin someone's employment in a good feeling way so that they want to give that best effort to maximize their full potential. I think that's a tremendous opportunity for employers. Many employers don't even have an employee handbook. Or if they do, it's rudimentary, something they bought off the internet that just, sets forth what the law provides. That's a missed opportunity in my view.
I wrote down it's either like you're checking the box or it's actually an embodiment, right? It's almost like values. Like you don't do values for your company because that's what everyone says you do. You do values because those to me are like your North Star, your guiding light. Like, okay, when I'm like gotten off track, what are those things that are really important to me that I'm gonna make my decisions from? It's the same way with, like, are you just doing this like you're saying, okay, we have to have this. Somebody said we have to have this to protect us versus no, this matters to me. I want to have this be used as a way that this is another way to show support to my employees
That's right.
that, this is how we will support you. This is how we will, and when I say take care of you, you know what I mean? Like that we will, honor you, like you say, see you, value you, and yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. So many employees don't feel valued, seen, and heard. And so just saying it out loud, it is a tremendous it has a tremendous impact on employee psychological safety.
Have you seen over the years, because I feel like I've been in the male dominated industries and I love men so much. And I think about sometimes of like how they've had to put on this brave face and shut down the emotions because that's kind of, the 70s, 80s and 90s. Have you seen a change in employers of what you're saying, like allowing the emotions to be there too? Like, we do see you, we do value you, like not this separation of like there's work and there's home and like don't mix the two together, like very much of you're a whole person, you have feelings that shows up here too. We're here, we're support you. How can we help?
Yeah, so the movement is to bring your whole self to work. And when you encourage leadership to cultivate their empathy component of emotional intelligence. That's really what you're asking them to do,
Yeah.
is to allow the people they lead to bring their whole self to work. I've got this situation at home, or I got to leave early because Billy has a baseball game, or I'm contending with a divorce, or I'm looking for support in this way because I'm going through this. That's all really important. And where I'm seeing it the most is permission to tend to family matters in a way that we didn't see 20 years ago. You know, um, when the employer says out loud, we want you to go to the baseball game, the
Mhm.
basketball game, with your kid, for your kid.
Yeah.
We want to cultivate that. We encourage you to bring your kid to work on XYZ days, so that they can see where you work, and they can see what you do, and they can see why you're away. Um, that's where I'm seeing the most movement, and remote work too,
Mhm.
offering remote work as a support to folks with kids and even single people who have no reason to come in. They're the most technologically sound folk. And so they've already got it all figured out. They don't need the FaceTime like we did 20 years ago. That's where I'm seeing the most movement, is with that older generation who maybe has grandkids now, seeing the value of the relationship with the children in a way they may not have gotten to see when their children were little, and now supporting their younger workforce, maximizing that time with their families, because you can go to the baseball game at 3 o'clock and have dinner with your family, and then when the kids are in bed, keep working. Understanding that as an employer, that the work doesn't have to be done under the roof of the employer, that's been a huge transition. And I think the pandemic really lent itself to illustrating that for many employers. I think had the pandemic not happened, it would have been a harder sell. It was starting to happen, but the pandemic really underscored the ability for so many people to work from home or to work after hours.
Yeah. I remember when I was working in my family's business, and my dad said, when Grayson, my daughter, was little, he said, Erin, I didn't realize how much your mom did until you have Grayson. And you're like, yeah, I can do that, but it'll have to be after this time, or
Right,
all of that. Because back in the 80s, right? Old school way of doing things, it was like most was the husband worked and the mom stayed at home. And that's not
right,
the way that it is anymore. And like you're saying, so if you're at work all the time and you don't recognize, oh, mom's got to juggle all of these things, and now working moms are juggling all of these things, and we're still, so and I wrote down a couple of things of like that old school way of thinking, like you have to be, I mean, this was very robust conversations I used to have with my uncle, because after I had Grayson, I was like, I'm not coming back to work. I'm going to work at the house because the nanny could come over, or she could take Grayson, and I'm not going to drive an hour there and an hour back and haul her and all of the things. And how am I going to breastfeed and just all of this stuff, right? And this idea, this old school way of thinking that, okay, in order for you to work, you have to physically be here, like this almost lack of trust. It's almost like I have to
yes,
see you, right? I have to see you here. But how many people go to work and don't physically work? They end up talking at the in the
right,
coffee area or whatever, and so this almost sense of lack of trust in your employees, and
right,
that they have agency over themselves, sovereignty over themselves, that they can get stuff done. And it doesn't lend to a cohesive work
right,
environment, right? Because if you're thinking that I'm on this team and you're on that team, employer versus employee, versus we're all on the same team, like how can I help you? Like, okay, you're going to go to your kids, and then it doesn't matter how long you're working. It's just like, are you completing the task that you need to,
Right.
whether you do it. And that was another
Right.
thing that we would go round and round. It's like, it takes me such less time than someone else, right? But so it looks like I'm not, well, what are you doing? Well, I've already done it. I've mastered it and I'm so much faster. And so we're not actually, um, what is the word I want to use? Celebrating the the employees that are able to master things faster and take on more responsibility and things of that sort.
Sure. I totally agree. All of that mindset is steeped in the feudal system and slavery,
Hmm.
right? Our the origins of employment in the United States are harken back to the feudal system of old and this unfortunate slavery system. And you're absolutely right. It's steeped in a lack of trust because the assumption is this person does not want to be here and they're here by force.
Yep.
And so I can't trust that they're really going to get the work done because they don't want to be here in the first place. But if you lift that assumption, which is steeped in the feudal system and slavery, if you lift that indentured servitude, if you lift that assumption that they don't want to be here because they're only here by force, well, then you can start to cultivate trust with the employee and realize that they're just as invested in getting the job done and doing a good job, and it's their profession. Of course, they want to. If you start with that assumption instead of they don't want to be here and they're here by force, yeah, that really flips the entire employment paradigm on its head. Um, yeah, I do lecture about um, the origins of our employment paradigm in the United States, and when people really wake up and realize, oh my gosh, those are the origins of our employment system,
Yeah.
and employees have been working toward, this different way of thinking for centuries. um, it really does help employers to see, oh, okay, I don't want to be any kind of part of that, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to do it this other way. And I have yet to see an employer be disappointed from changing its paradigm.
It's interesting you say that. It's almost like that awareness. You started with talking about emotional intelligence, and part of emotional intelligence is awareness. And so, not even being aware. And what I also think too is how we treat others is typically how we treat ourselves. So, from an employer standpoint, if you are expecting an employee to work late or to come in when they're sick, you're probably expecting that from yourself. And so, how much we just continue to, it's just like parenting, right? Like, we just continue these cycles because we aren't even aware, like, wait, do I even let myself have a sleep in day? Do I
Right.
have to be throwing up in order to say I'm not coming to work? Or can I just say, like, my body's really tired today, I'm
Yeah.
going to take it easy and I'm going to come back tomorrow?
Or even a mental health day,
Yes.
where
Yep.
we value our own mental health, where I'll do the work, but I just cannot
Yep.
drive in. I just
Yeah.
cannot. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to switch a little bit into, because one of the things that we talked about, Jacqueline and I talked before we, hit the record button of, you know, I always want to come from that place of empowered or love, right? Versus fear. And so, with, you kind of said you give workshops with the slavery, and I want to go back to that, because golden handcuffs, right? Like, even that term of like golden handcuffs, and like, let's pay them really well. And yes, we want to make good money because we have desires and we want to be able to live a certain way. But there comes a point in time where money is not the drive, where you want to feel a part of something bigger. Like, that to me, I think, is such a bigger drive from an employee standpoint. I'd be interested to hear your feedback on that, versus like, money is the thing that's going to keep people to stay. Like, comes back to that slavery um mindset, I think.
Yes. So, one of the components of well cultivated emotional intelligence is motivation, not just your own motivation of what makes you tick, but also the folks you lead. So it's incumbent upon you as a leader to figure out what is the motivator of the person I'm leading. Not what I would want, but what they would want, right? So some people do want money, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? They just want money. They don't care how they're treated. They just want the paycheck. Other folks need an atta girl or praise in some fashion. Other folks need that psychological safety. They need to know that they can trust the person who's leading them, that they are trusted, that they have psychological safety, and that they can bring their whole self to work. They're not having to fake it
Mhm.
or code switch
Mm.
or be somebody who they are not in order to be respected and valued at work. Um, so motivation means a lot of different things to different people, and you have to honor, if you want to be effective leader, you have to honor what the particular person you're leading views as motivation.
Yeah. Yeah, freedom was that when you said that, I'm like, "Oh, me? Totally." I mean, yes, money for sure, but freedom. Like that is ultimately like what I care about. And
Right.
so how much that felt now that you're saying that, like how much that felt restricted. Like I was like, "Okay, then I'm going to quit. Like you guys can figure it out, you know?" And how quickly that changed because it was like, "Okay, no, 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 we want you to be able to do and help us." I'm like, "I'm not going to like I want complete, like just let me do my thing." And here we go back to trust. So, yeah, that's really interesting. So, in terms of if you're from an empowered place, a loving place, where do we get into litigation? Because you started off saying, that's kind of what you were doing, and then obviously we want to get to the root cause and we want to understand before it gets to that place, and also recognize sometimes it does get to that place. So yeah, from an empowered place, how do we support ourselves as employers and also employees if it gets to that point?
All right. So I'll do this in reverse. So when an employee doesn't feel valued, seen, and heard, when they feel like they can't bring their whole self to work, when they feel like they're not led in an emotionally intelligent way, and there is an adverse employment action against them, they're left with no choice but to believe that that adverse employment action is because they belong to a protected category. They're a woman, a person of color, a member of the LGBTQ plus community, a particular religion. They're left with no choice but to believe that the adverse employment action is because of that and not because their performance is poor.
Mm,
Because, if you're properly leading someone, giving them guidance about where they're stubbing their toe or they're lacking, they have a gap in knowledge or where they could perform better, if you're not doing that in a way that makes them feel safe, that they can make a mistake at work and that it will be supported and guided instead of punished, um, then the person is left with no choice, right? But if you are supporting a person into improving every day and guiding them if they make a mistake, mentoring them into doing a better job, with emotional intelligence, you're less likely as an employer to get sued when something goes south. It's really not fluff when you think of it that way. So many employers think all of these soft skills are fluff and wouldn't that be nice? I don't have the budget, what have you. But then they wonder why there's babies coming downstream, right? The reason babies are coming downstream is because they're not taking care of those babies not falling into the water in the first place. And I was saying there's kind of a top five of preventing the babies from falling in the water. Uh, I think I mentioned emotional intelligence and employee handbooks. I would also emphasize professional development, training for training's sake. Um, I'm not talking about training your employees in the mechanics of doing their job. Oh, we got this new software in. We want everyone trained on how to use it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about true professional development where you're teaching things like emotional intelligence, how to test yourself, how to cultivate, how to reassess yourself, right? That is an expectation of performance for a leader. Um, Doing these things, putting these things in place in training is very effective. So things you can do are, not just what's legally required, the prevention of harassment or something like that, prevention of workplace violence, how to stay safe at work, etc. But how do you cultivate psychological safety? Hearing from your employees, taking a survey in advance of the training, hearing from your employees what they think, how they feel, giving the training on cultivating emotional intelligence to the leadership, and then taking, maybe 6 months later, assessing again. So using metrics to measure where you were, where you are, and where you want to go. And then the next thing I would recommend employers do is launch investigations, not just when it's legally required. Whenever there is bad behavior of any sort, launching an investigation about that bad behavior to nip it in the bud.
Mm.
That is a very effective way to ensure that your employees will feel safe, that they can bring a gripe, whether it be, something legally recognized or just so and so doesn't seem to like me, right? When an employee is empowered that their concerns will be heard vis-a-vis an investigation, that is a great way to prevent a lawsuit from happening when the employee's gripe was taken seriously and investigated and then documented, and a resolution is communicated to the employee, especially if you're going to make a change to the way you're doing things, communicating that to the employee. That's a huge impact on preventing litigation. And then the fifth way I would recommend to prevent litigation from happening, or at least reduce the risk, I should say, is by having some sort of neutral conflict resolution program for when you have a personality conflict among your employees, right? So many times things blow up out of proportion because they were not nipped in the bud initially. So two employees not getting along, they're at the same level, there's a personality conflict. The work isn't getting done because there's a disconnect in the flow of information. And so addressing that where employee A and employee B can hear each other through the lens of a neutral party who doesn't know the personalities and say, this is what so and so is saying. Did I get you right? Yes. This is what so and so is saying. Did I get you right? Yes. Can you see how it would make them feel? Can you see how it would make them feel? And addressing that as you go along makes a huge impact on psychological safety and ensuring that an employee feels valued, seen, and heard.
This is brilliant. And it goes back, I mean, we've talked about it, so much here, but it's like, what is the root cause? Like, an emotional intelligence. I wrote down, like, are we willing to have hard conversations? Like, you have to think about, like, from a self-awareness, are you okay going in and having a conversation with the employee? A lot of times we aren't okay with having hard conversations, right? Like, we have so many stories within ourselves of like, what does that make me mean? What does that
Right.
mean about me? Like, all of this stuff. And so we run that through the filter versus, this is what so and so is performance, or this is what they have done, this is what the standards are, how can we support them, how can we help them? And I wrote down too, it's like, this takes, air quotes, this takes time.
Right.
And so many of us, right? Like, I mean, I think a large part of the world's nervous system is not in a creative state. It is very much in survival based. Like the nervous system is at that um yeah, so I call it survival. It's just like you're in that fight or flight, right? Like
Right.
you aren't in a very relaxed, calm state. And so if you are always having to think you have to rush to the next thing, and I wrote down slowing down, like how much are we actually slowing down and pausing and thinking where we are, is this going to get us to where we want to go? And
Right.
sometimes we actually have to go a little bit, the saying is like slow down to speed up. It's so true. Like I haven't found an example of where that hasn't actually been the case. So slowing down and actually asking, like, how are things going? Have you read the book? I think it's called Infinite Game by Simon Sinek.
No, I'm going to write that down.
Probably would really love it. It talks about basically an infinite game or a finite game. And when you said something about um the employees and being heard and things of that sort, it's like the infinite game is not just like what is our goals and our profit this year. We're talking legacy, we're talking generations to come, and like how many business owners think from a visionary legend, like legacy place, versus what are we making this year, what are we making in the next 5 years. We're talking generations of people that are going to work for our company and things of that sort.
Right.
And I think that when you put those glasses on and when you think about like what are we actually trying to create here, not just in a short term, sometimes it helps us make that switch. I mean, there's all of these other things involved, but like I think sometimes we're so short-sighted
Yeah.
versus no, like how does this actually, the ripple effect, you and I talked about like the water drop effect, and you can explain that, but that is like when you sit down with one employee and they realize like, listen, this type of behavior, this nitpickiness is not tolerated in our culture, this is not how we treat humans, that spreads out to the rest of the company, right?
Right.
And the longer that you let that fester and go on, the more that people realize, okay, I'm not supported. It's here we go back to like, it's not what you say, it's what you're doing. It's how you're being.
That's right. Yeah, so the water drop effect is, one drop of water seems innocuous, seems inconsequential, but as it ripples out and it impacts the rest of the organization, you see that that one drop of water was actually hugely impactful. So all of these mechanisms that you put in place, you can either have a negative drop of water rippling out to your workforce or a positive drop rippling out to your workforce. It's really the employer's choice of what kind of organization they want to be.
Yeah.
Some organizations do just fine being, draconian, but I posture to guess that they would be even more productive if
Yeah.
they treated employees better. Yeah.
It's like long term. Like it might seem like it's working because I think a lot of people can be like, well, it's working, yeah, but for how long? How long
Right.
can you sustain it from that type of vibration?
And the younger the workforce becomes, well, I should say the longer the farther back we go in generations of the workforce. So
Mm,
things that were important to my father's generation at work,
yep.
not important to the younger generation that's just entering the workforce. And so you have to evaluate who's my workforce,
Hmm.
and you have to come along with the times. You
Yeah.
can't just stay where you were 30 years ago and expect your um, organization to continue to grow and prosper.
Yeah. That's like that old school mentality of like, well, this is the way we're doing it, like it or not, right?
That's right.
Well, what are you breeding within that? Feel, you're not going to attract new talent. You're not going to attract, you know, people that think outside the box or whatever it might be because
Yeah,
they aren't at the same vibrational level that you are, right? And so they're not going to hang around.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Do you have anything else that maybe we haven't talked about that you do want to share?
I think that what I do want to say is none of these mechanisms by themselves are going to do the trick. It all has to be in unison, ecumenically. All of those mechanisms piece together symbiotically to make an organization run in the way we're talking about. So you can't say, well, I gave one training and it didn't work. That's not it. You have to think of it as the ripple effect. You gave one training, then you also launched a new employee handbook. Sally's putting fish in the microwave and it's making Mary mad. Let's bring Sally and Mary together to talk about it. Piece by piece, inch by inch, drop by drop. That's how you change the culture and climate of an organization.
That that makes me laugh because it's like I don't think I'd complain about that, but I totally know the fish smell, and you're
Yeah.
just like, but we laugh about this, but it at the basis as humans, we want to be seen and heard, right? And so it could seem so superficial to an employer, but it's not about the fish, right? It's about, hey, I'm saying something that's bothering me, and you're not, it feels to me as if you don't care and you're not listening
Right.
to me. Like that's really what the message
Right.
is being relayed. Not so much. I mean, yeah, the fish might stink, but also it's like you're not hearing me. You're not supporting me. And so coming back to and it sounds simple, it's not easy, but like how do we want to be treated? Like how, like as a human, how do we want to be treated, and are we actually treating our people that way? And like I've always, like, as I grow, like I want the people that work with me, not even for me, right? Like work with me, like that they feel so valued, so fun. It's like, what kind of culture do you want to create? And having that idea, right? Like I always say, like, won the lottery, but like even if you do win the lottery, like nothing's going to bring you that feeling, but just that idea of like, I feel so grateful and so lucky that I get to work with this person. Like
Yeah.
that's what I want them to feel like.
That it's and it doesn't have to be miserable
Yeah,
to get the job done. In fact,
yeah,
it's more impactful, it's more productive to
very,
be in a harmonious environment.
yeah, very much so. I mean, I talk a lot about energy and vibration and things of that sort. And it's like, it's a lot more fun. And you can have, I mean, does it work or has it worked? Here we go back to like your dad and my dad. Did it work that way? Yes. But is it more fun? And could we actually, do a lot more things and more profit and all that if we're having fun and we're, everybody's supporting each other? Probably yes.
Yes,
And so just because it did work that way doesn't mean it needs to continue, or that is the best or correct way.
that's right.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Jacqueline. Where can people find you, learn more about you? I'll put all this in the show notes, but just for people that are listening, watching.
Sure. My website is wagnerhr.com. Wagner is WAGNER, HR as in human resources, wagnerhr.com.
Perfect. Okay. I'll put it in the show notes. Thank you, Jacqueline. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Erin. I had a great time.